The gentle hum of the Boeing 777's cabin was a familiar symphony to Ethan Sterling, a sound he associated with possibility, with the shrinking of the globe, with the quiet thrill of moving between worlds. Today, however, it was the soundtrack to his own public execution. He sat in seat 34B, a middle seat in the dense heart of economy class, his knees pressed uncomfortably against the seat in front of him. A well-worn leather journal rested on his lap, its pages filled with the elegant, precise lines of architectural sketches and complex equations. To any observer, he was just another man in a simple, dark gray suit, perhaps a mid-level manager on a business trip, folded into a space too small for his frame. The boarding process was in its final stages, a chaotic ballet of oversized bags and apologetic murmurs. And then he saw them. The air in his lungs seemed to crystallize. Isabella, his wife, soon to be his ex-wife, stepped onto the plane. She was a vision of curated perfection, dressed in a cream-colored cashmere travel suit that probably cost more than the combined monthly salaries of everyone in his row. Her laughter, a sound that once felt like home, now echoed with a brittle, performative quality. On her arm, his hand possessively on the small of her back, was Julian. Julian, with his slicked-back hair, his offensively white teeth, and a watch that seemed to absorb and concentrate all the light in the cabin. He was the man Isabella had chosen, the man she lauded as a visionary and a true provider, the hedge fund manager who had, in her words, rescued her from a life of mediocrity. They paused at the front of the cabin, turning left into the hallowed sanctuary of first class. But before they disappeared behind the curtain, Isabella's eyes scanned the economy section. It was a deliberate, searching gaze, the look of a queen surveying her lessers. Her eyes found Ethan's. There was no flicker of surprise, only a cold, triumphant pity. A small, cruel smile played on her lips. She leaned and whispered something to Julian. He glanced back, his expression a perfect mimicry of her disdain. He chuckled, a short, barking sound that carried down the aisle, and then made a show of patting his pockets, as if checking for his wallet in a den of thieves. The gesture was clear, a piece of street theater for an audience of one. "Look at you," it said. "Look at us." Ethan felt the gazes of the passengers around him, drawn by the unsubtle drama. He felt the heat rise in his cheeks, a flush of pure, unadulterated humiliation. He held his worn journal a little tighter. Its familiar weight was a small anchor in a sea of degradation. Isabella thought he was broken. She thought his architectural firm had collapsed into a pile of debt and failure, leaving him a husk of the man he once was. She thought his presence on this flight, in this seat, was the final, pathetic confirmation of his downfall. She didn't know that the simple, dark gray suit he wore was bespoke, tailored by a master in Seville Row who only worked for 3 clients a year. She didn't know that the cheap-looking watch on his wrist was a Patek Philippe prototype, a personal gift from the company's CEO. And she certainly, absolutely, had no idea that he, Ethan Sterling, the man she was so publicly discarding, was the majority shareholder of the very airline they were all flying on. She was laughing at him from a first-class seat he had paid for, on a plane he owned, as she flew toward a life she believed he could no longer afford. Within the next 8 hours, at 38,000 feet, that belief, along with the world she had so carefully constructed, was going to be systematically and irrevocably dismantled. It's a funny thing, isn't it? How people can look at the same thing and see 2 completely different realities. They saw a failure. I knew the truth. If you've ever felt underestimated or unseen, you know exactly the feeling I'm talking about. Let me know in the comments where you're watching from, because this is a story about how sometimes the quietest person in the room is the one who holds all the cards. Stick around, because the turbulence hasn't even started yet. The story of the flight began 6 months earlier in the sterile quiet of their minimalist living room. Sunlight, architecturally managed and precisely angled, streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air. It was a space Ethan had designed, a testament to his philosophy of light, form, and function. It was also the space where his life was officially declared ruin. He had called Isabella into the room, his heart a cold, heavy stone in his chest. He had rehearsed this. He had planned the words, the tone, the exact level of weary resignation he needed to project. It was the most important performance of his life, and the stakes were higher than any skyscraper he had ever designed. Isabella, he began, his voice carefully calibrated to sound strained. We need to talk. She turned from the window, where she had been scrolling through her phone. Her expression was one of bored impatience. What is it, Ethan? I have a lunch reservation with the girls at noon. It's about the firm, he said, letting his shoulders slump. He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture of distraction and anxiety he had practiced in the mirror. There's no easy way to say this. We've lost the Red Dragon account. Her eyes, which had been glazed over, sharpened. The Red Dragon Tower was his magnum opus, a multi-billion-dollar project in Shanghai that had been the crown jewel of Sterling Designs. What do you mean you've lost it? It was a signed contract. The investors pulled out. A chain reaction. The financing for our other major projects, it's a house of cards, Izzy. It's all falling apart. He let his voice crack on the last words, a masterful touch of feigned despair. He couldn't look at her, not because he was ashamed, but because he was afraid he would break character and laugh at the sheer absurdity of the lie. The truth was the Red Dragon project was ahead of schedule, and the investors had just wired him a bonus that could buy a small island. But Isabella didn't need to know that. Not yet. He watched her face as the information settled in. He had expected disappointment, perhaps even anger. He had not been prepared for the sheer, instantaneous absence of warmth, the way her face shuddered, as if a steel door had slammed down behind her eyes. There was no "we'll get through this," no, "I'm here for you." There was only a cold, terrifyingly quick calculation. Her eyes darted around the room he had built for them, no longer seeing a home, but an asset to be liquidated. "So what does this mean?" she asked, her voice devoid of all emotion except a faint, metallic edge of panic. "For us? For our lifestyle? It means everything is going to change," Ethan said, his gaze fixed on the polished concrete floor. "The firm is insolvent. We'll have to sell the house, the cars, everything." Isabella was silent for a long moment. He could almost hear the gears turning in her head, reevaluating their entire shared history through a new, brutal financial lens. Every vacation, every gift, every declaration of love was now being audited and found wanting. She had married a winner, a titan of his industry. A loser was of no use to her. "I see," she said finally. The two words were icicles. "I need to go. I'll be late for my lunch." She walked out of the room without a backward glance. She didn't touch him. She didn't offer a single word of comfort. She just left. Ethan stood alone in the sun-drenched room, the architect in the ruins of his own making, and felt a profound, chilling sense of victory. The first phase of his plan was complete. He had successfully become a failure. He sank onto the custom-designed sofa, a piece that had been featured in magazines, and let out a long, slow breath. The humiliation was a costume, and he was beginning to find it surprisingly comfortable. He had to remind himself that this was necessary. To see the truth, he had to first build a lie. A grand, spectacular, and utterly convincing lie. And Isabella, with her transactional view of love, had just walked into his trap without a second thought. The weeks that followed were an exercise in methodical self-destruction. Ethan played the part of the broken man with an actor's dedication. He sold the house to a shell corporation he secretly controlled at a fire sale price. He let the luxury cars be repossessed, arranging for them to be stored in a climate-controlled facility across town. He moved into a small, generic apartment in a less fashionable part of the city, an anonymous box that screamed reduced circumstances. Isabella watched this unraveling with a kind of horrified detachment, as if watching a stranger's misfortune on the news. Her visits to his new, pathetic apartment were rare and always brief. She would stand in the doorway, refusing to cross the threshold into his new reality, her nose wrinkled at the smell of cheap coffee and despair. "It's just so sad, Ethan," she said once, gesturing vaguely at the particle board furniture. "I can't believe this is your life now." "I'm managing," he would reply, his voice a monotone of defeat. Her sympathy, if it could even be called that, was short-lived. It was quickly replaced by a palpable resentment. His failure was an inconvenience, an embarrassing stain on her own carefully curated image. Their mutual friends, the ones who had toasted his success at glittering galas, now fell silent when he entered a room. They followed Isabella's lead, treating him with a gentle, dismissive pity that was more insulting than outright scorn. He was no longer a player. He was a cautionary tale. Then came Julian. Ethan first met him at a charity benefit Isabella had insisted they attend. "We have to keep up appearances," she had said, a phrase that had become her mantra. Ethan, in his one remaining good suit, a standard off-the-rack model he'd bought for the role, felt like a ghost haunting the edges of his former life. Isabella, on the other hand, was radiant, dressed in a borrowed gown, a predator back in her natural habitat. Julian materialized at her side like a magic trick. He was all charisma and expensive cologne. He spoke in a booming voice about his portfolio, his latest acquisition, his trip to Monaco. He held a glass of champagne as if it were an extension of his own arm. He ignored Ethan completely until Isabella, with a sigh, made the introductions. "Julian, this is my husband, Ethan," she said, the word husband carrying the weight of a contractual obligation she was eager to shed. Julian's eyes swept over Ethan, a quick, appraising glance that took in the cheap suit and the weary posture. The assessment was instantaneous and brutal. He offered a hand, his grip firm and condescending. "Tough break with the firm, I heard," Julian said, his voice dripping with insincere sympathy. "The market can be a real beast." "It can," Ethan agreed, his expression placid. "Isabella tells me you were quite the big shot," Julian continued, turning back to her and placing a familiar hand on her arm. "Good thing you've got me to look after you now." Isabella blushed, a girlish, pleased reaction that twisted a knife in Ethan's gut. Not the emotional knife of jealousy, that part of him had died in their living room 6 months ago, but the cold, sharp knife of confirmation. This was who she was. Her loyalty was an investment, and she had just moved her assets to a more promising fund. Throughout the evening, Ethan watched them. He watched as Julian charmed the crowd, his wealth of peacock's tail on full display. He watched as Isabella basked in the reflected glow, her laughter louder, her smile brighter than it had been in years. They formed a closed circle of two, and he was on the outside, looking in. Later, as they were leaving, Julian clapped Ethan on the shoulder, a gesture of faux camaraderie. "Don't worry, old sport," he said, his breath smelling of champagne and self-satisfaction. "I'll take good care of her. Make sure she doesn't want for anything." He winked, a gesture of such profound arrogance that Ethan almost broke character. Instead, he just nodded. "I'm sure you will," he said, his voice quiet. As they drove home in a taxi, the last vestige of their shared life, Isabella was buzzing. "Isn't Julian wonderful? He's so alive, so ambitious. He understands what it takes to win." The unspoken comparison hung in the air between them, thick and suffocating. "You used to be a winner, Ethan. Now you are not." Ethan stared out the window at the city lights blurring past. The city he had helped to shape with his designs looked alien to him now, a backdrop for a play in which he was a minor, tragic character. But the director was still in charge. He reached into his pocket, and his fingers found the smooth, cool metal of a small, custom-made key. It didn't open a door. It was a digital key, a cryptographic device that gave him access to his real world, the one hidden behind the elaborate facade of his failure. The humiliation was fuel. Every condescending word from Julian, every pitying glance from Isabella, was another log on the fire. And he knew, with a certainty that was as solid as the foundations of his buildings, that the fire was getting ready to burn. The official request for a divorce came 2 weeks later. It was not delivered with tears or regret, but with the cold efficiency of a business transaction. Isabella had her lawyer, a shark named Marcus Thorne who specialized in extracting maximum value from failed marriages, sent a thick packet of documents to Ethan's small apartment. Ethan sat at his cheap parkleboard table, a cup of instant coffee growing cold beside him, and read through the demands. It was a masterpiece of legal cruelty. Isabella wanted everything. The proceeds from the sale of the house. The art collection, which she had no idea was safely in storage under a false name. Alimony payments that were laughably optimistic, based on an income he supposedly no longer had. She even laid claim to his future earnings, should he ever manage to crawl his way back to some semblance of a career. The document was predicated on a single, unwavering assumption, that he was destitute and powerless. He was to sign, waive all his rights, and disappear quietly. The alternative, the papers implied, was a drawn-out, embarrassing court battle where his failures would be publicly dissected. It was blackmail dressed up as a legal settlement. A few days later, Isabella appeared at his door, Julian hovering behind her like a high-end bodyguard. She didn't want to come in. "Have you looked at the papers, Ethan?" she asked, her arms crossed. She was wearing a new diamond bracelet, one Ethan had never seen before. It glittered mockingly under the harsh fluorescent light of the apartment hallway. "I've seen them," Ethan said calmly. "Good," she said, her tone brisk. "Then you'll know this is for the best. It's clean. It's simple. You sign. We can all move on with our lives." Julian, who had been examining his fingernails, decided to contribute. "Listen, mate," he said, stepping forward. "Don't make this difficult. She deserves a certain lifestyle. You can't provide it anymore. I can't. It's just the way the world works. Natural selection." He grinned, as if he had just said something profound. Ethan's eyes met his. He held the man's gaze, his own expression unreadable. He saw nothing there but a shallow pool of ego. There was no depth, no substance, just a polished surface reflecting its own perceived brilliance. "I understand," Ethan said, his voice even. "I'll have my lawyer review them." Isabella scoffed. "What lawyer, Ethan? Can you even afford one? Don't be ridiculous. Just sign." Marcus said it's a standard agreement. "Nevertheless," Ethan said, "I'll have it reviewed." Her face tightened with frustration. This was not going according to her script. He was supposed to be a weeping, broken man, grateful for any scraps she chose to leave him. This quiet, calm resistance was unexpected, and it irritated her. "Fine," she snapped, "but don't drag your feet. I want this done by the end of the month. Julian and I have plans. We're thinking of a trip. Europe, maybe. To celebrate our new beginning." She said it with deliberate cruelty, twisting the knife. Ethan simply nodded. "I'll be in touch." He closed the door on their smug faces, the sound of Isabella's heels clicking away down the cheap linoleum floor. He stood for a moment in the silence of his small apartment. The air still seemed to vibrate with their arrogance. He walked over to the window, which overlooked a brick wall, and took a deep breath. Then he walked to his closet. Behind a row of his new, drab clothes, he pressed a specific point on the wall. A panel clicked open, revealing a small, biometric safe. He placed his thumb on the scanner, and it opened with a soft hiss. Inside, there was no cash, no gold, no jewels. There was only a single, sleek satellite phone and his leather-bound journal. He picked up the phone. He didn't need to look up the number. He had it memorized, along with a dozen others that connected him to the real world. The person who answered on the first ring was not an operator, but a woman with a crisp British accent. Her name was Anya, and she was the CEO of his private family office, the entity that managed the sterling fortune, a fortune that had grown exponentially since he had failed. "Anya," he said, his voice changing. The weariness fell away, replaced by the quiet authority that was his natural state. "It's Ethan." "Mr. Sterling," she replied, her voice warm but professional. "How did the performance go?" "They've delivered the script for the second act," Ethan said, a hint of dry humor in his tone. He picked up the divorce papers from the table. "I'm looking at it now. It's quite the work of fiction." "I'm sure it is," Anya said. "How do you wish to proceed?" "I need you to engage a legal team. Not just any team. I want the best. The most ruthless forensic accountants. The most aggressive litigators. I want them on retainer, silently. They are not to make a move until I give the word. Consider it done. I'll have a short list for you by morning. Good, Ethan said. He then described the diamond bracelet Isabella had been wearing. And Anya, I want you to run a full financial workup on a Mr. Julian Croft. Hedge fund manager. I want to know everything. Every investment, every debt, every asset. I want to know if his house is built on rock or on sand. I'll have my team on it immediately, she said, a note of anticipation in her voice. Anya enjoyed her job. Thank you, Anya, Ethan said. Let them have their celebration. Let them believe they've won. He looked down at the journal in his other hand, its cover worn smooth with use. Inside were the designs for a new pediatric hospital in Rwanda, a sustainable housing project in Brazil, and a revolutionary new type of public library. His real work. The work he did in the shadows, away from the glare of public acclaim that Isabella had so craved. He was building a new world, while she and Julian were fighting over the furniture in a world that no longer existed. The trip to Europe she'd mentioned, that was an interesting development. A long-haul flight, a captive audience, an opportunity. A faint smile touched his lips for the first time that day. The stage was being set. The pretext for the flight was a family wedding in the English countryside. A distant cousin of Isabella's, a detail that made the obligation all the more irritating for her. In their old life, they would have flown private, or, at the very least, been comfortably ensconced in the front of a commercial plane. But in this new, diminished reality, Isabella had to suffer the indignity of a commercial booking. Of course, she wasn't suffering that much. A week before the flight, she called Ethan. Her voice was syrupy, a poor imitation of friendliness. Ethan, darling, she cooed. I know things are tense, but this is a family event, and it would look strange if you weren't there. I've taken the liberty of booking you a ticket. Ethan knew a trap when he heard one. Isabella, I don't think that's a good idea. Nonsense. It's all sorted. It's the least I could do. A sort of severance gift. The condescension was thick enough to cut with a knife. My assistant will email you the details. It's a direct flight to Heathrow. Julian and I will be on the same one, so we can all travel together. Won't that be cozy? He knew exactly what she was doing. It was another power play, another chance to display her new status next to his new poverty. He would be the before picture, and Julian would be the after. Fine, Isabella, he said, the picture of weary resignation. Thank you. That's thoughtful of you. The day of the flight arrived. Ethan took a taxi to the airport, his only luggage a small carry-on bag and his leather journal. He was in his gray suit, the picture of corporate anonymity. He found a check-in desk for Oceanic Air, his airline, and saw them immediately. Isabella and Julian were at the first-class check-in counter, laughing with the agent. They were surrounded by a mountain of designer luggage. Julian was wearing a blazer with a garish crest on the pocket and sunglasses indoors. Isabella looked up and saw Ethan standing in the long, snaking economy line. Her face lit up with a malicious glee. She excused herself and walked over to him, her heels clicking on the polished floor. She moved with the predatory grace of a shark that has scented blood. Ethan, there you are, she said, her voice loud enough for everyone in the vicinity to hear. Oh, you poor thing. Look at this line. It must be miles long. It's fine, Isabella, he said quietly, keeping his eyes forward. Are you sure? It just looks so tedious. She glanced at his single, small bag. Is that all you're bringing? Oh, that's right. You probably had to sell all your nice clothes. She patted his arm, a gesture of mock sympathy. Don't worry. Once we're on board, maybe I can get a flight attendant to bring you an extra pillow. Julian sauntered over, a gold-embossed ticket wallet in his hand. Everything all right over here, my love? He asked, before turning his attention to Ethan. Ah, Sterling. Keeping the common folk company, are we? Good for you. Builds character, I suppose. He held up his ticket wallet. First class. Only way to fly. Once you've had it, you can't go back. You'd remember that, right? Ethan didn't respond. He simply looked at them, his face a mask of calm. This was what they wanted. A reaction. A flash of anger. A flicker of pain. He would give them nothing. His silence was a canvas onto which they painted their own ugliness. Well, "We'd better get to the lounge," Isabella said, pulling on Julian's arm. "They have vintage champagne and a caviar bar. You'll have fun with it, complimentary peanuts, I'm sure." She smiled, a final, venomous little twist of the lips. "Try not to miss the flight." They swept away, leaving a wake of expensive perfume and smug satisfaction. People in the line around Ethan stared at him with a mixture of pity and curiosity. He had been publicly, surgically humiliated. He felt the familiar heat in his cheeks, but this time it was mixed with something else, the cold, clean fire of anticipation. He continued to wait in line. When he finally reached the counter, the agent, a young woman named Sarah, looked at his e-ticket and then at him. "Mr. Smith?" she asked, reading the name on the booking Isabella had made for him. "That's me," Ethan said. She typed into her computer. "All right, Mr. Smith, you're in seat 34B. A middle seat. I'm sorry, that's all we have left." "That's perfectly fine," Ethan said. He smiled. "Thank you, Sarah." He took his boarding pass and walked toward security. He didn't go to the public lounge. Instead, he walked to an unmarked door near gate C-17. He swiped a plain black key card. Not the one for his hidden safe, but another one for this specific purpose. The lock clicked open. He stepped inside, into a quiet, private office that overlooked the tarmac. The airport's director of operations, a man named David Chun, stood up from his desk. "Mr. Sterling, we weren't expecting you." "David," Ethan said, shaking his hand. "Just passing through. I need a small favor. I'm on flight 815 to Heathrow. I'd like a full passenger manifest and the crew roster." "Of course," David said, already typing. "Anything else? We can have you moved to the private suite. Pre-board you, of course." "No," Ethan said, a small smile on his face. "Absolutely not. I want to board with everyone else. I want the full experience." "And David, as far as anyone on this flight is concerned, my name is John Smith, and I'm in seat 34B. No special treatment." "Understood." David looked puzzled but nodded. "Understood, sir." "One more thing," Ethan said, as the printer whirred, producing the documents he'd requested. He scanned the crew list. His eyes landed on a name. Chief Purser, Clara Bennett. He knew Clara. She'd been with the airline for 30 years. She was unflappable, discreet, and fiercely loyal. "Perfect. Please have a message sent to Chief Purser Bennett on flight 815, Ethan said. "The message is simple. The architect is on board. Await instructions." David's eyebrows shot up. The architect was Ethan's code name within the highest echelons of his own company. It was a name reserved for situations that required the utmost delicacy and absolute authority. "Yes, sir," David said, his entire demeanor shifting. This was no longer a simple favor. This was an operation. Ethan took the manifest and saw the names. Isabella Sterling. Julian Croft. Seats 1A and 1B. He folded the paper and put it in his jacket pocket. He then sat in the comfortable chair, looked out at the massive Boeing 777 being prepped at the gate, his 777, and waited. He enjoyed the quiet. It was the quiet before the storm. The boarding call for economy class finally came. Ethan joined the throng, another anonymous face in the crowd. As he walked down the jet bridge, he could feel the vibrations of the massive engines, a low thrum that resonated deep in his chest. It felt like a promise. He found his seat, 34B, and settled in, placing his journal on his lap. The passengers on either side of him were a young student engrossed in a textbook and a grandmother knitting a small sweater. It was cramped, uncomfortable, and utterly perfect. Then, the curtain separating first class from the rest of the plane was swept aside, and Isabella appeared. She was holding a glass of champagne, and she accidentally stumbled into the economy aisle, making a show of it. "Oh my," she exclaimed, feigning surprise. "It's so crowded back here." Her eyes, of course, found Ethan's instantly. "Ethan, I was just coming to check on you. Are you settled in? You look a little squished." Julian appeared behind her, also holding a glass. "Give the man some air, darling," he said loudly. "He's probably not used to being so close to other people. Let him enjoy the authentic travel experience." They both laughed. A flight attendant gently tried to guide them back to their seats. "Ma'am, sir, if you could please return to the first-class cabin. We're preparing for departure." Of course," Isabella said, taking a final sip of her champagne. She looked down at Ethan, her smile a slash of victory. "Enjoy the flight, Ethan. Try to think of it as an adventure." They disappeared back behind the curtain. The man in 34A looked over at Ethan with sympathy. "Your wife?" he asked tentatively. Ethan looked at him, a flicker of something unreadable in his eyes, and said, "Soon-to-be ex-wife." "Ah," the man said, nodding with understanding. "Well, good luck." "Thank you," Ethan replied. "I think my luck is about to change." The plane took off, a powerful, graceful ascent into the darkening sky. Ethan closed his eyes, not in despair, but in focus. He listened to the sounds of the cabin, the click of a seatbelt, the murmur of conversations, the soft chime of the flight attendant call button. He was a conductor waiting to lift his baton. The orchestra was ready. The audience was seated. The performance was about to begin. For the first hour of the flight, Ethan did nothing. He read a few pages of his journal, made some notes on a sketch of a bridge, and accepted a small plastic cup of water from the beverage cart. He was the very picture of a placid, unremarkable passenger. From the front of the plane, he could occasionally hear a burst of loud laughter from Julian or the high, bright peal of Isabella's voice. They were celebrating their victory, oblivious. The quiet before the storm. Then, he made his move. It was subtle. As a flight attendant passed, collecting trash, Ethan caught her eye and gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod. The flight attendant, a young woman he didn't recognize, simply nodded back and continued on her way. But the message had been sent. 5 minutes later, a different figure emerged from the forward galley. She was a woman in her late 50s, her uniform immaculate, her posture exuding a calm authority that decades of service had ingrained in her. Her name tag read Clara Bennett, Chief Purser. Her eyes scanned the cabin, not with the hurried glance of a busy crew member, but with a specific, searching intensity. Her gaze passed over Ethan, lingered for a fraction of a second, and then moved on. It was a masterful piece of acting. She continued her walk down the aisle, attending to a passenger's request here, sharing a warm word there. She made a slow, deliberate circuit of the entire economy cabin before starting her journey back toward the front. As she passed seat 34B, she paused, seemingly to speak to the grandmother in the window seat. "Everything comfortable for you, madam?" Clara asked, her voice warm. "Oh, yes, dear, lovely," the grandmother replied. As she leaned in, her body momentarily shielding her from the view of the rest of the cabin, she spoke to Ethan, her voice a low, confidential murmur that didn't carry beyond his ears. "The architect is on board," she whispered, the code phrase from David Chen's message. Her eyes, cool and professional, met his. "It has been many years, Mr. Sterling." The quiet bomb had just been dropped. The name, his real name, spoken in this context, in this place, was the key turning in the lock. "Clara," Ethan said, his own voice equally low. "It's good to see you. You're looking well." "And you, sir," she replied, a ghost of smile on her lips. "Although your choice of seating is unconventional, a necessary experiment in humility," Ethan murmured. He gestured with his eyes toward the curtain at the front of the plane. "We have 2 passengers in seats 1A and 1B. A Ms. Isabella Sterling and a Mr. Julian Croft." Clara's face remained impassive, but a flicker of understanding lit her eyes. She knew Isabella's name. She had likely served them their champagne. "I'm aware of the passengers, sir. I require a full, real-time status update on their behavior and consumption," Ethan instructed. "And I need you to facilitate a private, secure line of communication for me. I need access to the plane's satellite Wi-Fi, not the passenger version, the cockpit-grade, secure network. I trust you can disable the passenger service to their specific seats." "Consider it done, Mr. Sterling," Clara said without hesitation. "The captain's tablet is at your disposal. I'll bring it to you momentarily under the guise of a customer satisfaction survey." "Excellent," Ethan said. "Phase 1 is observation. No other action is to be taken until I give the word." They are to enjoy the full extent of the first-class experience they believe they are entitled to. Let them get comfortable. Let them get arrogant. A pleasure, sir, Clara said. She straightened up, her professional smile back in place. You just let me know if you need anything at all, she said, her voice now at a normal volume, directed at the entire row. She gave a little nod and continued her walk toward the front of the plane, a queen in her airborne kingdom, now acting on the orders of its hidden king. Ethan leaned back in his seat. The student next to him was oblivious, lost in the history of the Peloponnesian War. The grandmother was dozing. No one had noticed the brief, whispered exchange that had just set in motion a fundamental shift in the balance of power at 38,000 feet. He opened his journal again, but he wasn't sketching. He was waiting. He felt a profound sense of calm, the calm of an architect who has reviewed the blueprints, tested the materials, and knows, with absolute certainty, that the structure will hold. The humiliation he had endured was the foundation. The arrogance of his antagonists was the load-bearing wall, and the truth was about to become the wrecking ball. He settled in for the wait. Patience, after all, was a weapon they would never see coming. An hour later, Clara returned. As promised, she carried a tablet computer. Mr. Smith, she said, using his alias with perfect professionalism, Oceanic Air is conducting a survey to improve our passenger experience. As a thank you for your time, we'd like to offer you a complimentary premium beverage or snack. That's very kind, Ethan said, playing along. Thank you. She handed him the tablet. On the screen was a generic survey, but she tapped a specific corner of the screen 4 times in a rapid sequence. The survey disappeared, replaced by a secure login portal. The username, Architect, was already filled in. He typed in a complex alphanumeric password from memory. The screen flickered to life with a custom interface that only a handful of people in the world had access to. On one side of the screen was a live feed from a discrete camera in the first-class galley, showing the flight attendant's service area. On the other was a direct, encrypted messaging link to Anya, his family office CEO, on the ground in London. A third window showed the cockpit's avionics and communication status. This was the airline's central nervous system, and it was now at his fingertips. He typed a quick message to Anya. Phase 2 commencing. Is the Croft dossier complete? The reply was instantaneous. Complete and damning, Mr. Sterling. His entire enterprise is a Ponzi scheme propped up by a single, highly leveraged loan. The bank is already nervous. A whisper in the right ear would bring it all down. A file icon appeared next to the message. Ethan's face remained impassive, but inside, a cold satisfaction settled. Julian wasn't just arrogant. He was a fraud. A house of cards, just as he'd suspected. This changed things. It made the coming reckoning not just personal, but a matter of public interest. Clara returned. Can I get you that drink, sir? She asked. A sparkling water would be lovely, Clara, he said, handing her back the tablet. As he did, his fingers brushed a small button on the side. The screen reverted to the passenger survey. And Clara, he added in a low voice, it's time. Begin phase 2, the gentle erosion. With pleasure, sir, she murmured, and was gone. The first sign of trouble in paradise came 10 minutes later. From his discreet vantage point, Ethan watched the galley cam. He saw Clara speaking quietly to the flight attendant in charge of the first-class cabin. The attendant nodded, her expression serious. Julian pressed his call button. The light for 1B blinked on the cabin map on Ethan's hidden tablet screen. The flight attendant responded. Yes, Mr. Croft. How can I help you? Another bottle of the Bollinger, please, Julian's voice, tinny through the microphone boomed. And be quick about it. The lady is thirsty. I'm very sorry, sir, the flight attendant said, her voice a perfect blend of regret and firmness. It appears we've run out of the 2008 vintage. We seem to have miscalculated our stock. There was a pause. Run out? This is first class. How do you run out of champagne? My sincerest apologies, sir. We have a very nice Prosecco, or perhaps a sparkling California Brut. Ethan could imagine the look on Julian's face. Offering him Prosecco was like offering a king a paper crown. Don't be ridiculous, Julian snapped. Just find some more. Check in the back. I'm sure there's a secret stash. There is no secret stash, sir, the attendant said, her patience wearing thin. It's Prosecco or still water. Your choice. Isabella's voice now. Julian, it's fine. I'll have water. No, it's not fine. Julian fumed. This is a matter of principle. Ethan watched, a faint smile on his lips. He typed another message to Clara on the tablet, which he had retrieved under the guise of wanting to finish the survey. Excellent. Now the main course. At mealtime, the aromas of seared scallops and filet mignon wafted from the first-class galley. The passengers in economy were receiving their foil-wrapped trays of chicken or pasta. Isabella and Julian had, of course, pre-ordered the most expensive options. A flight attendant approached them, her face a mask of professional concern. Mr. Croft, Miss Sterling. There seems to have been a small issue with the galley's refrigeration unit for this section. For safety reasons, we are unable to serve the hot protein options. Julian stared at her in disbelief. You're joking. I assure you, sir, I am not. We can offer you the vegetarian pasta or a garden salad with grilled tofu. Tofu, Julian sputtered, the word itself an insult. I'm not a rabbit. This is unacceptable. I want to speak to the captain. The captain is currently flying the plane, sir, the attendant said coolly. He is aware of the situation and extends his apologies. Isabella, who had been looking forward to documenting her five-star meal on social media, was horrified. But there must be something you can do. The tofu salad is quite nice, the attendant offered unhelpfully. Ethan watched them argue, their sense of entitlement colliding with an immovable object of polite, procedural obstruction. It was beautiful. Every protest, every demand, was met with a calm, reasonable, and utterly infuriating no. Next came the Wi-Fi. Julian, needing to distract himself from the culinary injustice, tried to connect to the internet to check his stocks or post an angry screed about the airline. The connection failed. He tried again. Failed. He pressed the call button, his finger jabbing at it with fury. The same beleaguered flight attendant appeared. My Wi-Fi isn't working, he said, his voice tight. Yes, sir. It seems there's a system-wide outage affecting the passenger network. We're working on it. System-wide, Julian said, glancing around. He could see another passenger in seat 3, happily tapping away on his laptop. That man seems to have it. The flight attendant glanced over. Oh, he must be using a personal hotspot, sir. The plane system is definitely down. My apologies. Julian was turning a fascinating shade of puce. He was a man who defined himself by his ability to control his environment, to bend the world to his will. And on this flight, in this metal tube, his power was gone. He was being slowly, methodically stripped of every perk, every symbol of his status. He was becoming just another passenger, and he couldn't stand it. Isabella was watching him, a new, unfamiliar emotion on her face, doubt. The powerful, in-control man she had attached herself to was flustered, angry, and impotent. He was losing his cool, and in her world, that was a cardinal sin. Ethan leaned his head back against the seat and closed his eyes. The erosion was complete. The ground had been softened. The foundations had been weakened. It was time to bring the building down. He sent one final message to Clara. Phase 3. Bring me the captain. The captain of a Boeing 777 does not typically leave the cockpit mid-flight to visit economy class. His appearance, therefore, caused a minor stir. Captain Evans was a tall, silver-haired man with the kind of reassuring, steady gaze you wanted from the person flying a 400-ton aircraft across an ocean. He walked down the aisle, his eyes scanning the seat numbers. He stopped at row 34. Mr. Smith? He asked, his voice calm and authoritative. Ethan looked up. Yes, I'm Captain Evans. I was informed there was an issue with your seating arrangement. My deepest apologies. There has been a significant oversight on our part. His voice was loud enough for the surrounding rows to hear. Oversight? Ethan asked, playing his part. Yes, sir, the captain continued. Your booking was flagged for a complimentary upgrade, but due to a clerical error, it wasn't processed. I'm here to personally escort you to your rightful seat. The passengers around them were now fully invested in the drama. The young student had even looked up from his book. "My rightful seat?" Ethan said. "Yes, sir. The entire first-class cabin was reserved for you. We've just been keeping it warm." A collective gasp went through the nearby seats. The grandmother's eyes were wide. The man in 34A looked at Ethan with newfound awe. Ethan stood up, taking his journal with him. "Well, in that case, please lead the way." As he followed the captain up the aisle, he felt every eye in the economy cabin on his back. It was a walk of pure, unadulterated vindication. As they reached the curtain to first class, Ethan paused and turned to Captain Evans. "Captain," he said, his voice now low and firm, "before I take my seat, I have a message that needs to be delivered to the passengers in 1A and 1B. I believe they are causing a disturbance." "They have been vocal, sir," the captain agreed, his expression grim. "I have the message here," Ethan said. He opened his journal to a clean page. On it, he had written a short, simple note. He tore it out and folded it. "I want you to hand this to Chief Purser Bennett. I want her to read it to them, verbatim. And then, I want you to present them with a bill for their complimentary champagne and the cost of 2 full-fare, last-minute first-class tickets." The captain took the note. "Consider it done, Mr. Sterling." The alias was gone. The king was back on his throne. Ethan stepped through the curtain into first class. The atmosphere was tense. Julian was on his feet, arguing with a flight attendant. Isabella was staring blankly ahead, her face pale. They both froze when they saw Ethan walk in, followed by the captain. "What is he doing here?" Julian demanded. "Get him out of here." Captain Evans ignored him and handed the folded note to Clara, who had appeared at his side. "Chief Purser, a message for our guests in 1A and 1B." Clara took the note, unfolded it, and cleared her throat. Her voice was steady and clear, cutting through the cabin noise. "To Ms. Isabella Sterling and Mr. Julian Croft," she began, her eyes fixed on them. "A reminder of your current situation. You are currently 38,000 feet above the Atlantic Ocean. The Wi-Fi you have been unable to access has been used to conduct a full and thorough review of Mr. Croft's financial standing. The results are not promising." Julian's face went from red to a pasty white. "This is insane. This is a violation of my privacy," Clara continued, her voice unwavering. "The Bollinger champagne you consumed has been charged to the credit card on file, which has just been declined. The filet mignon you were denied was a mercy, as your joint accounts with Mr. Sterling have just been frozen, pending a full audit for fraudulent spousal activity." Isabella let out a small, strangled gasp. She looked at Ethan, her eyes wide with horror and dawning comprehension. The man standing before her was not the broken failure she had discarded. He was a stranger, a man of terrifying power and control. Clara wasn't finished. She saved the final, devastating sentence for last. She looked directly at Isabella, her expression not cruel, but factual, as if stating a simple, undeniable truth. "You are on this flight, in these seats, enjoying this illusion of luxury, solely at the discretion of the man you have spent the last 6 months humiliating. You are guests on a plane owned by Mr. Ethan Sterling, the majority shareholder and chairman of Oceanic Air. He thanks you for your patronage and wishes you a pleasant remainder of your flight." Silence. A profound, ringing silence fell over the first-class cabin. The only sound was the steady hum of the engines, indifferent to the lives being shattered within the fuselage. Julian sank back into his seat as if his bones had dissolved. Isabella stared at Ethan, her mouth slightly open, 1,000 questions and 1,000,000 regrets warring in her eyes. Ethan met her gaze. He didn't smile. He didn't gloat. He simply held her look, his expression a calm, quiet mirror reflecting back the entirety of her choices. The message was clear. This is what you have done. This is who you have become. He then turned to Clara. "Clara," he said, his voice soft but resonant in the silent cabin. "I believe my actual seat is 1A. Please be a dear and have it prepared for me. As for these two," he glanced at the stunned couple, "they can remain. For now. But please, bring them a bill for their travel. It's important for people to pay their own way in the world. Don't you think?" He walked past them, not even giving them a second glance, and settled into the plush leather of seat 1A, the seat Julian had occupied. He stretched his legs out, the vast space a stark contrast to the cramped confines of 34B. He opened his journal and picked up his pen, as if preparing to sketch. The storm had passed. The wreckage was all that remained. The rest of the flight passed in a state of surreal, suspended tension. Julian and Isabella sat in stunned silence, a force field of shame and disbelief surrounding them. They didn't speak. They didn't move. They simply stared ahead, prisoners in their luxurious seats. A flight attendant presented them with a tablet showing an itemized bill that ran into the tens of thousands of dollars. Julian looked at it, then looked away, a muscle twitching in his jaw. He had no way to pay it. Ethan, meanwhile, enjoyed a quiet, delicious meal, the very seared scallops and filet mignon that had been unavailable earlier. He drank a glass of perfectly chilled, sparkling water and had a long, productive chat with Anya via the secure messaging system. He approved the final plan for the Rwandan hospital and greenlit a new scholarship fund for underprivileged architecture students. He was building his world while theirs crumbled. Upon landing at Heathrow, the final act of the drama unfolded with quiet, brutal efficiency. As the plane taxied to the gate, Captain Evans's voice came over the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to London. We ask that you remain in your seats until the aircraft has come to a complete stop. However, due to a request from ground authorities, we will need Mr. Julian Croft and Ms. Isabella Sterling to remain on board after all other passengers have deplaned." A fresh wave of horror washed over Isabella's face. Julian just looked defeated, a man who had already surrendered. When the cabin doors opened, Ethan was the first to leave. He was met on the jet bridge not by a crowd, but by a single, impeccably dressed woman. It was Anya. "Mr. Sterling," she said with a warm smile, "welcome to London. The car is waiting on the tarmac." "Anya," he said, genuinely pleased to see her. "Thank you for meeting me. Is everything in place?" "Everything," she confirmed. "The bank that holds Mr. Croft's loan received an anonymous, but very detailed, tip regarding his creative accounting. They're calling a loan. He's ruined. As for the divorce, the team I assembled is ready. They've already filed a counterclaim based on the evidence of fraud and attempted asset concealment. The settlement she proposed is now a historical artifact." As they spoke, they walked past the waiting area. From the window, they could see the tarmac. Ethan paused. He watched as two uniformed officers from the UK Border Force boarded the plane. A few minutes later, they emerged, escorting a distraught Isabella and a numb-looking Julian. They weren't in handcuffs, but their humiliation was just as complete. They were being detained for attempting to enter the country without sufficient funds and for the unresolved issue of their fraudulent credit card transaction for the flight. Isabella looked up and saw him. She saw him standing there, free and powerful, next to a confident, elegant woman. She saw the private car waiting for him at the base of the stairs, a sleek black Mercedes that purred with quiet wealth. She saw the world she had thrown away and the sham she had chosen instead. Her face crumpled, and for the first time, Ethan saw what looked like genuine, soul-crushing regret. He felt a flicker of something, not pity, but a profound sadness for the waste of it all, for the person she could have been, for the love they might have shared if it had been built on something more substantial than money and status. He turned away from a window. "Let's go, Anya," he said. "I have a wedding to attend." He didn't go to the wedding, of course. The wedding had only ever been a stage. Instead, he spent the weekend in the English countryside at a magnificent estate, one he happened to own, finalizing the details of his new life. The divorce was swift and clinical. Faced with irrefutable evidence of her complicity in Julian's fraudulent schemes and her own bad faith during the settlement negotiations, Isabella was left with nothing. Not out of cruelty, but out of a simple, legal balancing of the scales. The assets were his. The debts, which Julian had generously shared with her, were hers. Julian Croft disappeared from the society pages, last heard of facing a battery of lawsuits and investigations. His house of cards had been blown away by a whisper. 3 months later, Ethan was in his new office. It wasn't an office in a traditional skyscraper, but a light-filled studio built into a restored heritage building overlooking the Thames. The walls were covered in sketches, not of towers that scraped the sky, but of community centers, sustainable homes, and public parks. His real work. His assistant brought in the mail. Among the letters and architectural journals was a simple, handwritten envelope with a local postmark. He recognized Isabella's elegant, looping script. He opened it. The letter was short. It was not a demand or a plea for money. It was, for the first time, an apology. It spoke of her blindness, her obsession with the shallow markers of success. She wrote that the humiliation on the plane was the most painful and most necessary moment of her life. It had forced her to see herself, and she was horrified by the reflection. She was working now, she wrote, as a receptionist at a small hotel. It was humbling, but it was honest work. She didn't ask for forgiveness. She only wanted him to know that she finally understood. Ethan folded the letter and put it aside. He felt no triumph, only a quiet melancholy. He had won, but what had he won? The right to be proven right? He looked out the window at the city, a complex tapestry of lives and stories. His story was just one of many. He picked up a piece of charcoal and turned to a fresh sheet of paper on his drafting table. He began to sketch, the lines flowing from his hand with a familiar grace. He was designing a new public library, a space for quiet contemplation, for the sharing of stories. A place where a person's worth wasn't measured by their bank account or their seat number, but by the quiet dignity of their own mind. True wealth, he reflected, had nothing to do with what you owned. It had everything to do with what you built, what you contributed, and the integrity with which you lived your life. Some people spend their lives chasing the illusion of first class, never realizing that the real journey, the one that matters, is happening within. He had been forced to take a detour through the back of the plane to remember that, and for that, in a strange way, he was grateful. He was free, he was home, and he had a world to build. What do you think? Was his response justified, or was it a step too far? It's a question about justice and revenge, and where we draw the line. Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this story of hidden strength and ultimate vindication, be sure to like and subscribe for more tales of karma and consequence. We all have a story, and sometimes the most powerful ones are the ones we keep hidden until the time is right.